recorded. So please feel free to post questions and comments there as well. Finally, we may address topics containing sensitive material. So let us remember to remain respectful, open, and growth-centered as a community. At the place George Mason University occupies, we give greetings and thanksgiving to these Potomac River life sources, the Manahoic ancestors, the Rappahannock, Hamanki, Mattaponi, Upper Mattaponi, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Monsamo, Monacan, Patawomic, and the Nottoway, past, present, and future, and to the Piscataway tribes who have lived on both sides of the river from time immemorial. I invite you all to acknowledge the indigenous stewards of the land, wherever you are calling in from. And at this point, I want to welcome our guest artist, Tlaloc Rivas, who has a career that's marked by a number of incredible achievements, and the biography which I'm going to read is abridged at best. A full list of his professional accomplishments can be found at his website, tlalocrivas.com. A writer, director, and associate professor in residence at the University of Connecticut, Tlaloc Rivas is co-founder of the Latinx Theater Commons, a member of Stage Directors and Choreographers and the Dramatists Guild, and the recipient of the Sir John Gielgud Fellowship in Classical Directing, the NEA TCG Career Development Program for Directors, and a usual suspect of a New York Theater Workshop. Tlaloc received his BA with honors from UC Santa Cruz, where he spent 2 seasons working with Shakespeare Santa Cruz. He received his MFA in directing from the University of Washington School of Drama, where he concurrently served as artistic associate of the group theater. Tlaloc recently premiered The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano, based on the novel by Sonia Manzano, at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and directed A Midsummer Night's Dream at Notre Dame Shakespeare Festival. Recent projects include the premiere of May Pearl at Mary Moody Northern Theater, St. Edward's University, Collective Rage, a play in 5 Bettys at Oberlin College, Para Banez at Quantum Theater, The Three Musketeers at the University of Evansville, Wit at Aurora Theater Company, and Abigail 1702 at Merrimack Repertory Theater. Other projects include Kira Alegria Judas, Water by the Spoonful, Lynn Nottage's By the Way, Meet Vera Stark, Kirsten Greenwich's Luck of the Irish and Baltimore, Anne Washburn's Mr. Burns, a post-electric play, Caridad Saviches, The House of the Spirits, Karen Zacharias, Mariella in the Desert, Octavio Solis's El Paso Blue, and La Posada Mágica, Maria Irene Fornes's Mud, and Sarita. Please join me in welcoming Tlaloc Rivas. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. And for that wonderful introduction.
That's a mouthful, man, but I am really, really excited to have you here. And thank you for agreeing to be in conversation with us. As I was saying earlier, I feel like, even though we've never met, I feel like I know you, partially through your work and also because a lot of the people that we've collaborated with over the years actually form sort of I would say a sort of a puzzle of concentric circles. So I feel like this is long overdue. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it just shows how small the world, theater world is.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I'm going to launch right in, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Is that right? All right.
Good. I see that there's a couple of classrooms.
Yeah,
watching.
There are. Thanks to my wonderful colleagues who've sort of made this part sort of a requirement to attend, but hopefully not a requirement, but a privilege. Or maybe it's both. I'm not sure, but
It's great.
that's right. I guess I'll start with a question that I normally start with. It's no secret that my first foray into theater involved writing and performing stories inspired by autobiographical experience, right? That was a defining moment for me, as well as many other artists from that era, sort of the 90s, who suddenly realized that our own marginalized experiences could provide fodder for the stage. And maybe for that reason, I've remained interested in how life experience informs the work of other theater artists. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the communities you inhabited as a child, as an adolescent, as a young adult, and how they may have informed the stories you tell.
Super complicated question to begin, but I didn't step foot into the theater until maybe my second year in college. So my exposure to what consisted of the theater was probably the Muppet Show, more than anything else, and having an understanding that that there was a place where people performed on a stage in front of an audience, even if they were, fake and full of puppets. My upbringing is there's bits and pieces of it around, on the web, and mostly that I grew up with a father who was a political activist in the Chicano movement, and my mother was a nurse for many years. And although they never specifically exposed me to the arts, particularly theater, I grew up watching a lot of film. I listened to a lot of music, and so the arts, and my sister was a dancer, so the arts were consistently around me. I wholeheartedly wanted to become involved in political activism and history because of my fantastic high school teachers, and that's how I started at UC Santa Cruz. But it wasn't until I think on a whim, I think I was assigned to see a show, and I can't even remember the name of it, but it was Brechtian in style, and it had that aesthetic of politics melding with storytelling and breaking the fourth wall and aggressively engaging with the audience. And I truly identified with that. And one of the things that sparked my interest in theater making was the anti-immigrant initiative in California back in 1993, which was called Proposition 187.
Yeah.
And it was that inspired me and a group of other Latinx students who I was going to college with to assemble a series of one-act plays, adjunct prop plays that would speak to what was happening to Latinos in the state of California and the educational system. And that's kind of like I became de facto the director of that, or organized it. I think I must have done well, because a lot of people were like, "You're really good at organizing and putting, herding cats." So I started taking directing, and then.
Did you grow up in California? Was most of you?
I did. I was actually I was born in Tijuana. I grew up in Escondido, and then Watsonville, which is just south of Santa Cruz.
Yeah, I know. Well, actually, I got my undergraduate degree at Santa Cruz, UC Santa Cruz also. So.
Oh, that's right. That's awesome. Go Banana Slugs.
Yeah,
and the best mascot in the country. Yes. It was at that point where I knew that if I wanted to continue studying directing, I needed to get professional experience. That's what they tell you. So I did a few internships at the at Shakespeare Santa Cruz at the what was called the Hispanic Playwrights Project at South Coast Rep. And I did a season at Dallas Theater Center. From there, I got into graduate school, and it was a trial by fire, as some people might tell you graduate school is. And I began to realize that the work that I was very interested in kind of was not in terms of, I wasn't really interested in pursuing the classics, even though I loved it. I love Shakespeare and I love modern playwrights like Ibsen and Brecht. But I saw a need for Latinx voices in the American theater, and I started to engage with writers around the country through the Hispanic Playwrights Project, and then all over the country. And I mostly started cutting my teeth in developing relationships with writers and developing new work as a director. And I didn't know at the time that what I was actually doing was, or what people call dramaturgy, which was like there's a particular type of new play dramaturgy that I was doing as a director, which is simply just asking questions about, is this what kind of message, what kind of audience you're looking for, what is the intent behind the work, and to continually ask the question to help the writer make their work sharper, more succinct, and never prescribing, which is it's a very delicate balance when you're giving feedback to a playwright about the kind of work and the kind of audience that you want to reach. And in some cases, they wanted to break into the American regional theater, airstream, and then there are others who are just like, I don't really care, and I don't really want to be anointed as the next Latino playwright. And so, they did their own work. And so it's been an education. And from that, I've been more and more pivoting towards writing and directing. And so that has been really wonderful. Actually, I've had these stories inside of me I didn't realize until, I think for a lot of us, the pandemic really unlocked a lot of things that allowed us to kind of stop in terms of like constantly working and going, okay, now what do I do? So there was this moment of like many of us, self-reflection about what we could do. And so I pivoted more towards writing.
I appreciate the fact that you've had a very eclectic career as well. I was just thinking of the discipline of directing, but also we add in the other disciplines, of course. But what I mean by that is you've directed a lot of the classics and Shakespeare, and you've been sort of at the forefront of development of new Latinx voices. And that to me is sort of like suggest that you've engaged in a lot of careful listening. So just like you were talking about, sort of the pandemic sort of provided a lot of us an opportunity to turn inward and look and see which stories, wanted to come out. This guest artist series is really an outgrowth of my graduate course, Dramatic Theory and Criticism, Unpacking Race and Power in Contemporary American Theater. And the curriculum of that course, which represents a deliberate departure from the historical approach to dramatic theory, which centers Euro-Western drama and which centers white narratives, or offers limited opportunities at best to subvert those narratives. The goals of this course has been to, well, they're manifold, but I made a list of them so that I would not ramble. But some of the goals include developing more awareness of the ways in which the underrepresentation of marginalized voices persists in American theater, becoming more familiar with artists and scholars of color engaged in conversations for radical change and radical justice, cultivating more comfort and proficiency when discussing race and power, and ultimately identifying and articulating how race and power inform our own aesthetics, processes and practices as theater makers. One reason I wanted to invite you into the conversation is because you've been engaged in that conversation for a long time. And one of the assignments that I have in the syllabus is your HowlRound article, What is Cultural Appropriation? Revisiting Peter Brook's Mahabharata, which I hope I'm saying correctly, which is part of a series entitled Race and Representation in American Theater. I thought the article really articulates one approach to decolonizing theater very well. When we talked a few weeks ago and you said, I wrote that article a long time ago, which may be the case, it still outlines something that's very relevant. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about where you were in your journey as an artist when you wrote that article, which, if I'm correct, you also ended up writing that sort of inspired your thesis at UC Santa Cruz, or became part of that discussion. So I wonder if you could talk about where you were when you wrote the article and sort of where you are now.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this as an undergraduate in 1995.
Yeah.
I know that dates me, but
So
I considered Peter Brook one of my sort of directorial heroes, and I even went to New York as I was auditioning for grad school and saw his production of The Man Who, and continually followed his work, and it was my conversation with some of my professors at the time who had actually been directed by him, actually one of them, and it was a very terse and difficult conversation to have, because I was afraid that I was, in some ways I was just like a little bit off the mark. But as someone who has always considered themselves not a minority but part of the global majority, and to explore this idea of like, well, what does it mean when we apply European techniques or European values or viewpoints or analysis into the work of artists, works that are considered to be like the bedrock of like their cultural civilization, like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. And I was fortunate that I had professors who were so dedicated to that. One of my mentors was Kathy Foley, who was an expert on puppeteering and particularly Java puppetry from Java and from the islands. My interest in non-Western theater kind of started with her, and I wish I had more of it when I was going through the academy. But I've always sort of sought out different international perspectives, and luckily for someone like Peter Brook, who seemed like at the time like pretty woke as a white guy, to do that, I also started to think about, well, who gets anointed to do that? Who gets a pass to do their version of maybe an African tale? And I got to see more and more often, especially in the American Regional Theater, that it was mostly white artists who were being asked to do that. And so I started to question, I started to rally for more directors, more theater makers from the global majority to have access and given resources to do that work. And so that was a very lonely journey up until 18 months ago.
Yeah.
And so when it finally happened, when we were having this discussion about race and racial reckoning and who gets to tell these stories, I was like relieved, but I was just also exhausted by like, God, it took so dang long.
Right.
But that's great. however we got there, we're getting there, and I'm seeing more and more of that conversation happening. Whether we'll see results or actions behind that, it's time will tell. But it's a marathon, not a sprint, and it's one of the reasons I came back to academia, and I just joined the faculty at UConn, is that I'm finding such inspiration from this generation about like how they're seeing the world and what they want to do. And it's always my dream that every graduating class of students like goes off and they start to create theater companies, and that they don't just go to New York or LA, but that they go back home, or they go back to places where historically marginalized people need art in order to respond to what's happening today. I like to say that, yes, we have first responders like firemen and nurses and doctors, but we as artists are second responders to what is happening in the world, because it's not enough that we're in the midst of a pandemic and we're trying to figure out how to heal our bodies, but we also need to heal our souls in a lot of ways, and art can do that. And we're also navigating what the industry does in terms of the processes and how we make that work, right? In terms of intimacy direction, in terms of how to create an inclusive and brave space in the rehearsal room where people feel empowered to make work without triggering or re-traumatizing something that may have happened to them in the past, or if a particular work discusses something that is particularly difficult, but still important to tell, that we still can allow ourselves to tell that story, but at the same time make sure that we're not harming ourselves or re-traumatizing ourselves in the same way. So it's a very, it's a really delicate balance. It's a really tricky tightrope to walk, both as a teacher and for students here. But I think it's all going to be worth it at the end. I know, like we're still figuring it out, and we just have to be patient with ourselves to find the right language, like anti-racism, and what does that mean right now? But I think, like anything else, it's not going to happen overnight. So I'm happy to talk more about that, but I want to get to your next question before.
No, it's okay. It's okay. This is all great. The problem is, I have some questions for you in my mind, but as you speak, actually more questions are forming. So, but I want to make sure that I leave room for community conversation, which is really, really one of the goals of this process. We'll come back to anti-racism in a minute, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how your work in the theater informed and informs your work in the classroom.
Yeah, it's like I said, that I think the last several years have been a real delicate balance between how people want to make the work and people who have only known the industry in one certain way. And I think in particular also like the commercialism and the rush to make it, which is like, hey, we got to get it up in 3 weeks or 2 weeks, and there's no time for a real process to occur. I mean, this is in the before times, and also it's just sort of devaluing people's needs, particularly women, in terms of like childcare, and that should be like a given in any production that every company, just like any other Fortune 500, needs to provide that, or there needs to be bereavement leave or compassionate leave, and sometimes the theater just before it was like we just steamrolled over that and we just replaced someone, or we started to shun people who raised an objection about theater practices, or why a certain play was cast deliberately wrongheadedly, like when In the Heights in Chicago was cast with, a clearly white Usnavi. And yeah, I even wrote an article about that and how wrong. And it's just that, it finally all came to a head. And all of that, for me, to just go back to your question, is all of that is to say is that all of that work is necessary, and it needs to, I want young artists, students, to be proactive in recognizing not only unconscious bias in themselves, but also unconscious bias in the theater or in the classroom, and where does it come from? And sometimes you're not aware of it until somebody says, "Oh yeah, like everybody in the Emmys who won an Emmy last night were white." And it wasn't until like the fourth or fifth, it's like, yeah, I know where this is going tonight.
Yeah.
I know where this is going tonight. And people were like, well, what do you mean? It's only like 1 hour in. It's like,
yeah,
I don't need to go any further. This is what's going to happen, because we know the systemic, patterns and the historical precedent that has occurred when people, the people who are most recognized are those of the I used to say dominant culture, which is like the white European culture. I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with saying that anymore, but like all terms, they evolve and they change.
Say a little bit about that.
What the dominant culture
for a long time, with the sort of implicit sense that, okay, that's white, that's European. Why is that?
Yeah, and now I'm just like, they're not dominant in any kind of way if you look around the world. But clearly it's, I've shifted more towards like, we know that the decision makers are mostly, white, and how do you, even though they are, there seems to be some movement, or in terms of like how they're approaching the manifesto, "We see a white American theater," and also making these proactive statements, but only time will tell whether or not they will actually give up or cease or share that power of decision making or a collective agreement to create a season that actually represents our ever increasingly diverse society that we have.
So. And I do see shifts. I see, more airtime being given to narratives of people of color. Certainly, actually, I think Hollywood is a little bit ahead of theater in this regard, at least commercial theater. Mm-hmm. But you touch on something that I wanted to go back briefly, because one of my graduate students was just saying that this morning. In fact, if you're thrust into a theater and you've got 3 weeks to mount a show, then where do you find time for the development of a process, right, that supports this kind of conversation? And yeah, I certainly see that in the classroom as well. But I'm of the opinion that we have to change the process, right? And sort of this conversation becomes part of the process. It needs to become embedded into the process. It's not a sidebar. It's not a side note. Mm-hmm. It's something that supports the sort of the wellness and the integration of, really, as you said, the global majority, which I like. I like that too. So.
Well, it's like it's like eliminating the 10 out of 12. It's one way to ease the pressures that not just students but other people have in order to have that. You need that time to rest your mind in order to come back and do your best work. I think we're seeing that in Hollywood with the potential IATSE strike and the call for French. I don't know if you know the term French hours, which is like you film only at a certain period of time, and then that's it. It's usually like 8 to 10 hours, and then you just call it a day instead of working 14 to 16 hours. And
I see some people weighing in the chat agreeing with that. Changing the process. Yes. So let's talk let's talk for a little bit about this term. So, full disclosure,
Mhm.
I'm really not a fan of the term anti-racist theater. For me, it sort of spotlights what it is that we don't want, what we're fighting against, rather than what it is that we want.
Mhm.
And often, in the words of, and you probably knew Lori Carlos, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, the late great Lori Carlos, who was one of my mentors and also became a friend. But she would often say to me, I'm much more interested in what you're for than what you're against. So when I say anti-racist, I'm sort of co-opting a term which has found its way into popular culture in a way, but I'm referring to an agreed upon thing, which I think for most of us is, the inclusion of narratives from historically marginalized individuals, or the global majority. And that includes a broad spectrum of racial identities. And we haven't even talked about gender and orientation and all that stuff, but it's all part of the same for me. The replacement of the sort of Eurocentric canon with BIPOC narratives, the subversion sometimes of classic literature by casting across racial lines, telling stories through multiple modes of telling, and on and on. So
Mhm.
I just wondered if you could cite a few examples of your own work. As I was saying earlier, I know you've had a very sort of eclectic career. So cite a few examples, if you would, of your work that illustrates some of those sort of divergent approaches.
Yeah. These I'm gonna answer this in two parts. One is the question of anti-racism as a
That was a lot.
term.
I know that was a lot.
Yeah. No. Just to touch upon that briefly.
Yeah,
I went to UC Santa Cruz, and as you know, and Angela Davis was one of the professors there.
that's right. That's
So
right.
was Howard Zinn. So was Adrienne Rich. So we were so blessed with
Yeah.
the very people who coined that term and who really brought that into consciousness in terms of critical race theory. And
Yes.
so, yeah, we were spoiled, but people thought we were radical and communists, and so that's great. If you hate anti-racism, you're really going to love what I'm going to say, which is like one of the things that I'm the project director for. I am the curator and project director for a project called the How to Be Anti-Racist Project.
Mhm.
And we are using the text of Ibram Kendi's book.
Yeah.
And we've commissioned 10 to 12 Black writers from the Dallas area, and working with Bishop Arts Theater Center, with Teresa Wash Coleman. And we did this, we came up with this idea last summer, where we saw there were a number of writers and Black artists who were struggling in the midst of getting federal support. And so we wrote up a grant to the NNEA, and we got about $80,000 to commission these writers to create a short piece in response to any of the themes that were present in the book. So if somebody wanted to write about double consciousness, that particular chapter, they could write about it. They could also write a response have a conversation with that chapter or that theme.
Right.
Because anti-racism is yes, I can see where you're coming from in terms of like the term itself feels like I'm against, or I don't like, instead of saying the thing that you do like. I say that I've often taught I have often stated in my directing class that to respond to your classmates' work by stating what you see, not what you don't see, like not what you don't like, because that's not helpful for the director to
Right.
either, like, if the director says, well, I'm trying to achieve this moment, and the classmates will say it's not quite clear yet that you've reached it, but here's some suggestions. That's a really good way and a proactive way to respond to the work. So it may be, you know, anti-racism may be a little bit cumbersome in terms of like, it feels like a blunt object at the moment, but when we're trying to eliminate unconscious bias in the classroom, in the curriculum, in the way that we work, in the way that we cast, in the way that we hire people, I think it's a very valuable tool. I think we can all strive to do that in a way that because when you say you're not racist, as a lot of people like to say these days, it feels like, that doesn't mean anything. You know, and I think it's better to be anti-racist and to not, you know, to stand up for something than to not speak out and speak up against injustice and discrimination and systemic what's the word? Systemic oppression, systemic exclusion of marginalized voices. Let's just put it that way. The second part. What was the second part? The second part was.
What did I ask you to? I think I was asking you for a specific example of.
Oh yeah. You might find this funny. I mean, I'm going to go way back to when I was in undergrad, and I wanted to direct. I chose to direct My Children, My Africa by Athol Fugard, who is another one of my heroes, because, you know, back in the day, in the 90s, we were, or in 80s and 90s, we were fighting. Yeah, we were like really rallying against apartheid in South Africa and other countries around the world. And I wanted to do this play. And I remember reading in his notebooks, you know, like one of his techniques, and this has nothing to do with race, but like one of his techniques was like, all right, make sure that you keep, you know, as you're staging the play, make sure that you keep your actors 6 feet apart at least until you get to like the most intense scenes, and you can have it out like face to face or, you know, in close proximity. And lo and behold, that's like the best technique you can have right now in the pandemic times.
I was gonna say that's
6 feet apart. But that was one of the things that the Athol Fugard came up when I was talking to a student who was like really upset about having to read Athol Fugard's work. And he was telling me that, well, he's a white man and he has no right to tell that story or of those plays. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting, because I saw Athol in a completely different way. But maybe if we have this discussion about his role at that time, where he was clearly breaking the law in terms of like working with South African artists, his theater was continually shut down, that he was threatened with imprisonment, that he was actually forced into exile in order to continue to make that work. That he was one of those rare people who was trying to elevate the voices of the systemically oppressed. And without him, we wouldn't have had these amazing, fantastic actors and writers and directors who came out of South Africa. One of them was like, I remember seeing Black Panther, and he played, I'm trying to remember his name. He played Black Panther's father, who gets killed in the, you know, when the building gets blown up. But yeah, he was like, but he was the one who like, he learned theater through working with Athol Fugard and being in his plays and reading about their process, which was very collaborative. Fugard was a playwright director who really wanted input from his actors. Yeah. So they were essentially creating sort of collaboratively that work that needed to be, that the rest of the world needed to hear, because clearly the South African government did not want, you know, they didn't want any sort of negative publicity about what they were. I was going to say,
they did not want that narrative exported in any way or form. But.
So that's an example of like the kind of conversation we still need to have in terms of like
Tlaloc, okay, we just gotten a name to.
Somebody's going to say it's not safe smoke.
T'Chaka.
Yes, thank you.
Well, I knew that.
John
John
Connie.
Connie. John Connie. If you look up his name and the theater works he's been in,
He's done a lot of
along
stuff.
with Sax Mokai.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just an incredible actor, and I think he's still working.
I think so.
I think
Yeah,
he's still
done
alive.
a lot of stuff too.
So anyway, I go back to that because I think we're yes, we have to sort of question like who's doing what and their motivations and their intentions behind the work, but I think a lot of us are also, even someone like me who's a person of color, I just did a play called The Revolution of El Serrano about the young lords in Puerto Rico, I'm sorry, in New York as they were coming up. And I'm not Puerto Rican. And so I had to, you have to do the work. You have to talk to the people. You have to go to New York. You have to have the conversations with Sonia Manzano, who played Maria on Sesame Street, and ask her, well, why did you write this story? And she said, it was just an incredible, it's been like a 3 or 4 year journey so far in terms of telling that story, but to be as authentic in terms of like the people that we cast, the diversity that we want, because the Panthers and the Young Lords were so connected, and much of the movement was populated by not only women but Afro-Latinos, and wanting to make sure that we had Afro-Latinos in my cast was super valuable, because as we know, like we saw what happened within the Heights when they came out. If you don't do that work, people are going to think that you don't see, that people don't understand that the spectrum of Latinidad or being Latinx goes from Black all the way to the fairest of the fair. So we want to make sure that those voices are heard, even if it's not specifically from a Afro-Latinx experience. There were people who, in the history, in the research that we did, that needed to be included. And so that was super valuable and continues to be in my work.
Yeah, and even the sort of nonverbal representation is really powerful and really important, important. I could go on chatting, but I want to make sure that we open this up for other questions and comments while we have you in our presence. So I'm going to do so. I'll invite everyone to open their screen up to gallery views and turn their cameras on if they would like. And I will do my best to curate questions. If you have one or a comment, you can either raise your hand like that, or put your little hand up next to your image on screen. Yeah. Yes, Charisse?
This is I hope, a pretty quick question, but who I guess is your favorite playwright right now? We won't tell the others. and like, what play would you say we have to read?
It's I grew up a lot of heroes and playwrights, and I love them all. I mean, I think everybody needs to read. My favorite playwright is Maria Irene Fornes. I think we refer to her as the godmother of Latina theater, and for the East Coast, and then like Luis Valdez is the godfather of Chicano theater on the West Coast. But Maria Irene Fornes is a case and study of someone who was not, who refused to be put in a box, and created work that was not only that reflected her experience of being Latina in America as an immigrant, but she, her work touches so many different circles in terms of like surrealism and experimental theater, and she was a lesbian, and she's one of the most unheralded writers ever. And one of the things that we did when we were starting the Latinx Theater Commons was to create an institute dedicated to her and to her legacy, not only as a writer but as a teacher, because she's influenced and taught so many writers, Latinx and non-Latinx, and those students are now teaching her techniques as well. So if you get a chance, you can look up the Fornes Institute. It's online, and you can check out her work clearly in your libraries. But I mean, if everybody had to read a play, I mean, if I were to choose one that I would start with, would be Conduct of Life. And yeah, that play scares me to death to do one day. It's on my dream list, but that play really shook me up when I first read it, and still continues to shake me up in a lot of ways. But you can read her other plays, and they just, if you read a play like The Danube, which is like, there's like a Hungarian like voice lesson as you're watching the play, and there's puppets, but she really foresaw like the environmental crises that we're facing right now. Like, she wrote this 40 years ago, and like what's happening now with the rising tides and increasing temperatures around the world, like it's all in the Danube, and it's and how it affects us interpersonally and politically and emotionally. It's just an awesome play. So I just gave you two plays, but yeah, so Maria Reine Fornes, definitely top of the list, followed by Luis Valdez.
Thank you. Charisse, that was one of my questions, if you had to name it, so thank you. I appreciate that. I remember seeing a production of Mud in graduate school. It changed my life. I loved it. Yeah. I see Caitlin, hi. In San Marcos. Good to see you. You have the floor.
So lovely to see you. Thank you so much for hosting this and for inviting us all into this conversation. Wonderful. Deeply grateful to have an opportunity to listen and learn today. I had a question, as we unpack this pedagogy and we try to disrupt and dismantle the systemic racism that is inherent in the art form and in the industry. Mm-hmm. Do you have any ideas, suggestions, dreams on how we do that collectively as a community? How do we approach reframing the pedagogy, the vocabulary? How do we educate both our faculty and our students in sort of embracing this work, and any ideas on a process on how to approach that? Because that's what we're all doing, is trying to figure out how to do that, right? So I'd love any ideas or input that you have.
Sure. I mean, one of the things we're doing at UConn is involving the students and play selection and telling them that the play does not have to be published in Dramatists or Samuel French in order to be done. We have an open source resource in terms of plays at the New Play Exchange, which is probably the most diverse library of plays you can read about, and you can punch in any subject matter, and you can come up with like dozens of hits based on that. It's only $10 to join. I'm not shilling for New Play Exchange, but that's where I'm turning most of my my search for plays through that avenue, because that library is you're going to find the most diverse, you're going to find about writers you've never heard of, and it's really just an incredible resource. And so part of that is to make sure that students can go to that library and online resource you can just download a sample and just read the pages. And you can also, there's information there where you can reach out to the playwright and say, hey, I read like your sample. I'd love to read the rest of this play. Can you send it to me? And more times than not, they will send it to you.
Have
And
you come up
yeah.
against, like any material that's in the canon currently, producing it and having to navigate through racially charged language and narratives with the students, with the directors, the dramaturgs, trying to sort of, how do we navigate current canon, as well as, like, thank you for offering that as a place for us to look for new material.
Oh yeah, we just did that for Midsummer Night's Dream at Notre Dame Shakespeare. I had the benefit of working with Cameron Knight, who's now the head of acting at Rutgers, and he was our Oberon. And we went through the script with a fine-tooth comb, because you don't realize that there was a lot of colonialist attitudes in terms of like how people were referred to in terms of what was considered to be beautiful and fair as being white versus someone who was dark or black. And those are just encoded words that have, it's part of the DNA of the English language that has just kind of like, been passed down to all of us. But there are ways, and there are proactive ways that you as a director or dramaturg or as an actor to really research and find the origins of these terms and where they actually came from. So certain terms that came up, of course, was like the word fair. It's like, and because one of our actors was African-American, to refer to her as fair just first of all, didn't seem right. And second of all, that you can, especially in works that are in the public domain, that you can switch up the words to find more appropriate terms that better reflect who you might cast in terms of what kind of diverse cast you might have in a Shakespearean production. So that was one of the things that we did. And also, I think everybody, especially in the academy, what they're doing is just really looking at their syllabi and what are we actually like reading in terms of like the great plays of the of the canon, whatever the canon is, and just sort of re-examining, well, what can we exchange, or what can we have in conversation with a particularly problematic text. And I think that's another way to just start to have that conversation in terms of race and gender and even having conversations about plays that involve characters that might be not on the gender binary. I just wrote an adaptation. Actually, no, I didn't write an adaptation. I wrote a version of Antigone, which is being produced at SUNY New Paltz, that changes Antigone's sibling into someone who is non-binary, because that was who they cast at SUNY New Paltz. And it's been really extraordinary to be influenced by that casting and to really examine that in terms of their role in the production or in that story. And so that finding living writers through the New Play Exchange, doing their work, who maybe also like just be looking to like, I just need somewhere to workshop in my play and have it done, and inviting them into the process in such a way that it makes their work even better. And it's the resources of the university and the students and the faculty to be able to do that. We're best equipped to do that, but not necessarily professional theater companies. They're kind of stuck with appeasing their audiences, I guess. I don't know. That's a longer discussion, but that's a couple of ways. Yeah.
Yeah. The copyright issue, is really tricky, and becomes almost like a gatekeeper. I mean, we can't be rewriting people's plays. However, the issue that we're coming up against with some of the musicals and plays, that you can't change anything, becomes sort of its own challenge in this type of work.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know that you can actually contact the licensee or the agent and put out a query about, hey, like for example, I remember, oh my gosh, Rajiv Joseph wrote a play called The North Pole, and there's a word that we don't use anymore to describe somebody who's developmentally disabled. And all they had to do was just, he wrote it like 10 years ago, but all you have to do is write to him and ask it. This term seems to be problematic, and we don't want to. One's wondering if we could use a substitute. And most playwrights are more than happy to respond and say yes or no. But we have to honor that because you can't change the words on your own. But involving the playwrights in that conversation is critical.
And I think also that inquiry provides the opportunity for them to grow if they're interested, right? But I know we had a similar issue recently with Footloose, our production, right?
Mm-hmm.
Changing the gender of one of the characters. Some really, really good stuff here at Tlaloc. Some great strategies for dealing with stuff. I'm sort of curious. I see your hand, Rex. I want to follow up with. So when you have a discussion, however, with the cast, crew, about some of the offensive language in Midsummer Night's Dream, what do you do with it? Do you change it, or do you just use that production as an opportunity, as a moment to educate the people who are involved in mounting the show?
Well, both Cameron and I were really prepared to have those conversations, first of all, before we even met the cast, because I didn't know a lot of them were cast before I was brought into the process. And so I didn't know them that well. But at the same time, when the question comes up, we have the discussion about, like, why is it problematic? Why is this character? Well, first of all, it's like, why is this here? Why does the character say it? And if we believe it's something that's antiquated, of course, we sort of try to find a deliberate, either we cut it or we just find a suitable substitute, right? Because you can do that with Shakespeare's plays. Yeah. And I remember that there was a word that that in itself is not necessarily. I'll give you another example. The word chink is in the play in terms of when they're describing what the gap in the wall is during the play within the play, the Pyramids and Thisbe play that they do.
Yeah.
And we just because the word is triggering. The word is triggering, especially in terms of anti-Asian sentiment, and so we found a very suitable replacement in cleft, and nobody in the audience would notices the difference that you use the word cleft because it means the same thing. But by the word, we didn't want to have anybody be taken out of the moment when they hear that word, even if it's in an innocuous context. We just wanted to eliminate the possibility that somebody goes, oh, yeah, what did they just say? You know what I mean? So, it was just a really easy substitute to make.
Okay, that's wonderful. Okay. Rex, you have the floor.
Yeah, hi, thank you.
Yeah.
Great to chat and hear about all of this. I'm a theater maker in Washington, D.C. and a grad student at George Mason. And professionally, I run the theater program at an Irish organization. Our mission statement is contemporary Irish work. And we have several commissions in the work now that are intentionally trying to be more broad and multicultural. And I'm just curious about just sort of thoughts on bringing in a broader perspective, a broader, non-monolithic perspective when you serve a mission statement that is traditionally, very homogenous and and like, what are, what is your responsibility to a mission statement of the organization, and what is your responsibility to new artists who aren't from that heritage or that background, that you are hoping to bring into your space?
Super great question. One of my friends wrote a play about the San Patricios, who were the Irish regiment that went down to fight with the Mexicans against the American army during the U.S.-Mexican War. And I think of the extraordinary diaspora of the Irish culture, because I think that the Irish culture isn't monolithic as well, right? There's a particular journey that Irish Americans particularly have taken in terms of like how they were vilified and reviled to suddenly now being celebrated in parades and in films. And as I was having this conversation with my wife, who is of Irish descent, and we were watching this trailer of an upcoming film by Kenneth Branagh called Belfast, and I was like, wait, Belfast has a wall? And she was like, yeah, there's a wall. Like, she went there. And I was like, oh, just like on the border, right? So like, it's finding those connections that I think you can tell that you can, yes, you can still kind of like use the experience, the Irish experience, and tell stories of the experience that resonate with people from around the world. And clearly, like, I remember watching once with my mom, and she was like, I so identify with that story. And she's like a Mexican immigrant who didn't speak English until, but it was that conversation that was happening between the European immigrant who was coming to Ireland or to England, and that
Right.
love relationship that she was really identifying with. And I think there are places and crannies, and I like to say the nooks and crannies of that wall, the wall that kind of divides us all, right? That where we can find the stories that really kind of pinpoint some kind of like, how are we really connected? And maybe it's commissioning writers to explore a particular historical event, or that touches upon like the Irish experience and how it's connected with other marginalized voices in that time. And one of my favorite movies of all time is called Matewan, which is about the coal workers strike that was directed by John Sayles. And not a lot of people know, it's that, the miners at the time were, there are many of them who were not just like poor white West Virginians, but many of them were immigrants from Italy, from Ireland, and African Americans, who were all trying to form a union in order to create better working conditions and living conditions for themselves. And it's those kind of stories that really I would love to see, because we need more of that in our country now more than ever. So I hope that there are places and opportunities for you as a company and as an audience and as an artistic director, where yes, there's place for Keats and oh gosh, I'm trying to think of other writers, Beckett, and where you can have these plays alongside other plays that you might be able to find writers for.
Yeah, thanks. And what was the name of the play with the Mexican and the Irish connection?
Oh, it's called the San Patricios, like the St. Patrick's, and that was the name of the regiment that they were given by the Mexicans. But there's a whole story about them. There's actually a big monument to them in Mexico. It's really a fantastic story.
Great. Maybe a commission work about that.
Yeah, well, the play already exists.
The play already exists. That's right.
So
I'll look for it.
Somebody else has written it, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna let them have all the credit.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. I didn't know that either. We're still close to, we're all reeling from the wake, I think, of the wall and what a big issue it became in the previous administration. But I imagine there are lots of stories that are brewing currently or have brewed in the wake of that administration.
Well, it's still happening now. Look what we're doing with the Haitians on the border in Del Rio.
Yeah. I was thinking specifically about Mexican American community,
Mhm.
but yeah, it's still happening for sure. It's still happening. Maybe one more question, Charisse. All right.
I'll take one more if no one else has their hand raised. I wanted to say that this is a slight tangent, but that I had the opportunity to talk to an incoming UC Santa Cruz undergraduate this week. And she said to me, she's like, I need your help. I need some alumni support because we're going to go to that theater department and we're going to say what we need. This like fired up, beautiful Black woman.
Nice.
So I just want to let you know that spark is still working and those students are still, fighting the regents with all of their might. And so, but I wanted to turn it back to our students and to, these undergraduate students who are coming out of this 18 months of not being able to make things in person for audiences, for live audience. And what advice do you have for them? What encouragement do you have for them?
Oh, I mean, be patient with yourselves, and it's a tricky time. I was talking to one of my colleagues who are like teaching a movement class, and many of the students are still kind of afraid to get close to each other. That's a result of what we've been dealing with in terms of social distancing, and I think it's okay. It's okay to only you can know when it feels right to have like the interpersonal thing that needs to happen in the classroom and on stage. And we're here in Connecticut, we're kind of like super blessed that like 95% of the students are vaccinated, and the state is a pretty well on its way in the 90s in terms of like the entire state being vaccinated, which is really great. So it's getting better, and yeah, I think there's a lot of baby steps, but I also think like I go back to this idea of like yeah, there's some plays out there that I was thinking about, like, okay, let's think about some plays where they're like 6 feet apart, or or at least a few feet apart. And I was reading the Antipodes by Annie Baker, and I'm not the biggest fan of Annie Baker, but it's set in a conference room, and I was like, oh yeah, let's put them around a big giant table. They can be as far apart as they need to be, right? Athol Fugard, there's only like 2 or 3 characters in most of his plays, and even a play like What the Constitution Means to Me, which isn't available yet for licensing, but it's really just a few people in a large American Legion room, and I think there's ways to navigate that, and then slowly work your way into like the more interpersonal stuff. I'm advising a student on their production of 448 Psychosis, which is like, why are you doing this play? But no, it's fine. It's but I think the opportunity is there to figure out and address the mental health of students, and at the same time kind of have that sort of discussion about how you're going to stage this when people are still kind of hesitant about being in the same room with one another. But I mean, all I can say is only you can know you, and whatever feels right to you or whatever your needs are, just ask, because asking is free, right? And the worst that can happen is that it can't be done at the moment, but at least you will have been heard, and maybe you can be part of the solution in some way.
Yeah, thank you. On that note, I think we will close. Many thanks to the George Mason School of Theater and Mason Players for Change, for their support, creating and publicizing this event. Special shout out to Nick Horner, who's kind of working behind the scenes, managing chat, keeping us on track. Thank you, thank you. I didn't get to speak to everyone, but it's great to see all your faces, some of whom I have not seen in a very long time. Some of you I'm seeing for the very first time. Again, thanks to Tlaloc Rivas, whom I really hope to collaborate with, like live and in person at some point, not too distant future. And last but not least, thanks for everybody for showing up today, for engaging in a respectful and I think generative conversation. I think this conversation is really ongoing. So even things we didn't discuss today, just because we didn't have the time, I hope that some seeds have been planted and that they will flourish and grow.
And that's all we can do, right? Like, I think showing up is half the battle. Like
That's
just
right.
being there for one another and listening. And thank you all for being here. I don't feel like I was as articulate as I usually am, but it was really, it's nice to engage in conversation with folks across the miles. It really makes me feel good that I have something to say, but I wish I could only get to hear what you all have to say at some point. And so I wish you all the best. Keep doing what you love to do, and you know, don't hesitate to reach out, not only to me, but to Jola if you have any questions.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
that just means you'll have to come back. That's all.
Anytime.
All right.
Anytime.
Take care, all. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good to see
Bye,
you.
Jola.
Bye.
Thanks for all the great questions. Adios.
Adios.
Okay.